Welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. It is the 8th of December, and I want to welcome all you new listeners out there who have a special interest in my show. Welcome aboard. Glad you can be a part of it, and I hope you come away with something interesting, if not provocative. And that's what we aim to do here. On Fridays, try to go a little bit further, a little bit wider, a little bit deeper, stretch the bounds of the everyday perception of what it's like to live here on this 3D experience. Terra Station 3. So, what's going on? What's happening? I'm going to be doing a little bit of an experiment today. I'm recording this as a video. I'm not streaming it live, but I'm recording this video, and I may just pop it in today on YouTube after the show as the official record, as the official YouTube record. We'll see. We'll see. I'm not looking too bad today. The light is good. We had some snow last night here in Austin. It was pretty magical, I have to admit. I remember, so it started to come down when I went into H-E-B, the grocery store here. I'm like, wow, this is kind of getting interesting. This is looking like snow, little tiny bits, right? So then I go inside of H-E-B and I do my little shopping thing, and I look out the door. I'm sort of like, 3/4 of the way down the aisle, and you can see the front door in the distance, and you just see all the snowflakes coming down. I'm like, wow, this is real. And so I got my car, and I eventually drove back home. I went out a little bit later, and it was coming down even more. So by the time it was around 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock last night, we had the ground covered with snow. We still have some snow on roofs. It's melting. It's probably going to get up to about 50 degrees today. But it was really magical. And they had snow in Houston, which was kind of mind-blowing. I don't know when the last time they had snow in Houston. But it's a big deal when they have snow in Houston. Unfortunately, well, it's a winter wonderland here in Texas. That is not the case in Southern California, where it continues to blaze and burn hotter and hotter than ever before. We've been kicking this around over on Facebook, and the timing of the fires in conjunction with the announcement that Jerusalem was going to become the new capital, or the established capital, and the established recognized capital by the U.S. Now, let's be clear. This was passed by Congress about 22 years ago, and every president has just been kicking it down to the next president, kicking the can down to the next president. Until finally it came to Donald J. Trump, who decided to make one of his campaign promises good. Well, the world's not been the same since. The world has changed, and I'm not saying that that there has been an act of terrorism as a result of what's happened in Jerusalem. No, but from a metaphysical standpoint, you have to admit the timing is pretty darkly auspicious, ominously auspicious. Because what have we been calling Hollywood and LA for years? Babylon. It's the new Babylon. Well, Babylon is burning. It is on fire. Woke up today with a note from a Facebook friend and a person that I knew from the Bay Area who had moved to San Marcos not San Marcos, Texas, San Marcos, California. And she marked herself safe in the lilac fire. And I'm like, what? There's another fire happening? So sure enough, they now have fires in San Diego. So let's just get everybody out there caught up. This is our third or fourth day now of covering the California fire, or fires. So this is from CNN. And the pictures, if you haven't seen the pictures, they're not pretty. Not unless you are totally into fire and pyrotechnics and want to have a nice spot in hell for yourself one of these days. These are really, really intense, very apocalyptic looking pictures. So, again, if you're a Zionist Christian and you're into this, we're going to talk a little bit about that again today. If you're into this whole thing about Jerusalem and in the third temple, the building of the third temple, which is a big part of this, right? It's a big part of this sort of Armageddon eschatonic process. Then you're going to like something like this, right? I mean, this is clearly a sign that there's an acceleration of events that are going to bring on the second coming of Christ. And if you are a good enough Christian, you're gonna miss it. You're just gonna be sucked up into the rapture zone, which doesn't even really exist. The rapture, I mean, it's a very, very, very small portion of the Bible, which was later reinterpreted to fit the new version of Revelation, which theoretically already happened, by the way, if you're not aware of that. But let's get into the LA fires. So this is from CNN. It says, from the federal perspective, President Donald Trump declared an emergency in the state Friday due to the wildfires and ordered the Department of Homeland Security and Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, to coordinate disaster relief efforts in Los Angeles, Riverside, San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. That's just about all of Southern California, people. New fire. The lilac fire in San Diego County started Thursday, grew to 4,100 acres in a few hours, leading to new evacuation orders. Evacuation centers have been set up in affected areas as the fire moves west toward Oceanside and Camp Pendleton. Camp Pendleton, big military base. And I know a lot of people there in that part of the country. And boy, I hope they're okay. I have some very cool clients, very cool friends, and even people that I don't know. I just hope this is a pretty big, pretty epic, pretty dramatic series of fires. And I don't think we're out of the woods. I think the whole fire story is just getting started, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So there's the lilac fire, and again, I hope people out there are okay. I got a Facebook post from another friend. I hadn't talked to her quite a long time. Sort of, lost touch, and she had been living in Ojai and had to run out with whatever belongings she could get and family photos, and this is very real stuff, and we had people in Sonoma and Santa Rosa, Napa, again, having to go through the same thing. So, I mean, the state is a tinderbox, but there may be other reasons. There may be other reasons why we're getting so many fires. And it's not just, the desiccants of the chemtrails, which we've talked about. School closings. Officials have shut down schools spanning at least 16 districts. Jerry Brown issued a state of emergency proclamation for Santa Barbara and San Diego counties. That fire just started up overnight, and it's already an emergency situation. The declaration sought free state resources such as the National Guard to support response efforts. He's also requested federal assistance to supplement aid and local response. And man, I mean, the pictures are looking a lot like Sonoma and Napa. I mean, these fires, the intensity of these fires. I'm looking at a photo of a burnt Mercedes that was torched after the Skirball fire. in Bel Air, and you're seeing. I mean, really, the message here is, you could have all the money in the world, and when something like this goes down, I mean, it really reduces people and creates a very humbling and leveling effect. And for some people who don't have the money, don't have the resources, I mean, a lot of these people in Bel Air may be able to move back and rebuild because they have a significant amount of insurance if they want to do that. I mean, that's up to them. What happens after the fires, of course, is we're coming into the winter season, and they'll get the mudslides. That's what happens next, because all the topsoil has been torched and burned to the ground. And not just the topsoil, but a lot of the ground cover too as well. In fact, almost all the ground cover in many cases. So what's going to keep those hills from sliding down when the rains start to hit? And they will hit. The rains will come, but they probably can't come soon enough. We got the fast winds, 35 to 55 miles per hour. The Santa Anas, also known as the Sirocco's. So here we go. I'm going to break down the 6 fires for you. You got the Thomas Fire. That's the largest. That's 132,000 acres. That started on Monday in Ventura County. It's about 10% contained. Think about that. 10% contained. They've got 90% of this fire they're still fighting. 90%. And now it's spreading to neighboring Santa Barbara County. I mean, this is insane. The Creek Fire, the second largest blaze, ignited a day later in neighboring Los Angeles County. It's burned 15,323 acres. That's 20% contained. Okay, then we have the Rye Fire. That broke out in LA County on Tuesday. That's burned 7,000 acres. And the firefighters are making progress with it. That's probably the most contained, about 25%. Well, Squirrelball's 30% contained. Let's see. We've got the Lilac Fire, and this is a fast-moving fire. This is in San Diego County. 4,100 acres. The fire is burned through just a few hours, erupting Thursday in San Diego. So it's unclear how much of it is contained. Boy, it's prayers going out to some of these people out there. This is a big time, man. This is a really huge time. The Squirrelball Fire started Wednesday. That's a brush fire in LA County. That's 30% contained. That's the one near Brentwood, right? The Liberty Fire, that's a blaze in Riverside County. That's burned 300 acres. It is 5% contained. So of all the fires, the one that's got the most containment is the Rye, and that's 25% contained. This is just nuts. Absolutely nuts. So I think it was Cheryl sent me a link to a website called Jumpin' Jack Flash, and it's a really interesting website. You should go check it out. The author's name is Johnny Mnemonic, and he talks about how one of the reasons why we're having these fires is because these anaerobic methane gases are being released from the ocean. And it's a big issue. It's a real big issue. And we're trying to figure out how to deal with these anaerobic methane gases, which they're basically translating into global warming. This is kind of where he's going with this stuff. It's a very, very interesting premise, and he has a long list of events that are connected to fire and what's happening with the release of these methane gases. Methane sulfide, really fascinating stuff. So if you do the math and you start to look at sort of the topography and where this is all coming from in Southern California, near the ocean, low-lying area near the ocean, it might make some sense that these methyl sulfide gases emitted from the ocean might have something to do with this. It's an interesting premise, interesting idea. Of course, there's the timing bit that is connected to this whole piece around naming the new capital in Jerusalem. It's fascinating. It's the fascinating convergence of events here. I talk about Eddie Lynn sometimes on the show, and he's a brilliant cryptographer and decoder, and he was making the connection between the actual two events, and they've been bouncing around in my head as well. So here we are. These are very, very interesting times. The Muslim world, particularly the Palestinian world, was engaged with a day of rage yesterday, and will continue to do so as a result of this transfer process of the capital. Now, Trump has said that he's going to put a 6-month hold on this. Trump is a cagey character. You never know what you're going to get with him. Him or his clone, whoever's calling the shots. But you never know what you're going to get with him. Because I said it before, he's got that Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. The true node in Gemini. So he may do something different 6 months from now by putting it on hold for 6 months. Who knows? Maybe the time traveler is waiting for an event to occur within 6 months, which is a game changer. Because we all know Donald J. Trump was a time traveler. And so is his son, Barron, who's really Steve Bannon. Right? I mean, it makes for great sort of postmodern, deconstructionist, comic book mythology. Doesn't it? I think it's great. It's one of those things that we can just tease. We just tease it, right? We just tease that thing out and see where it leads us. So here we are. This is happening right now. This whole thing with Israel is so fascinating. I've got a little piece here, which is just how much the U.S. evangelical Christians love this thing. Okay, they love it. They love it. The Pope doesn't like it, but he's not an evangelical Christian. They may believe in the same God, but they don't interpret it in the same way. So this is from Sputnik News, that trusted source of news, which is now considered an enemy publication. The Tokyo Rose of Russia. President Donald Trump has said the United States recognized Jerusalem rather than Tel Aviv as the capital of Israel. A prominent U.S. evangelical Christian leader spoke to Sputnik about why Trump's decision brings humanity closer to the end of days and the second coming of the Messiah. World leaders, including Pope Francis, have condemned the United States' plans to recognize the disputed holy city of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. But President Trump's move is music to the ears of 50 million evangelical Christians who in the U.S. unreservedly support Israel and believe the Jewish state is an important part of biblical prophecy, which will lead to Armageddon, the end of days, and the second coming of Jesus. Dr. David Reagan, the founder and director of the Texas-based Lamb and Lion Ministries, spoke to Sputnik and said he welcomed Mr. Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I totally support his decision because Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Always has been for 4,000 years. The Jews have had that as their capital, and it has never in all of history been the capital of another state, not a Muslim state or an Arab state. It is long overdue. Every U.S. president has made a promise to move the embassy as part of their campaign, and as soon as they're elected, they forget about it. But this is a good indication that Trump will keep his campaign promises. Dr. Reagan produces a weekly program, Christ and Prophecy, which is broadcast on 13 Christian TV channels to 80 million homes in the U.S. Although most Christian voters, most Jewish voters, chose Hillary Clinton in last year's U.S. presidential election, evangelical Christians voted overwhelmingly for Trump, and many of them believe the end of days is just around the corner. Here we go. The third Jewish temple in Jerusalem is key prophecy. This is where the rubber hits the road, boys and girls. Those who believe in end-times theology believe the Jewish people must maintain control of Jerusalem and build a third Jewish temple on the Temple Mount, which is currently occupied by the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam. I think it's number 3. The first and second Jewish temples were destroyed by the Babylonians. And what do we have in California right now? Yep. Babylon is burning. And the Romans. So the Babylonians and the Romans, many centuries ago. Dr. Reagan, who has studied biblical prophecies for many years, explained how he foresaw the end of the world. He said, first would come the rapture, of course. A moment when the true believers in God, including the 50 million evangelical Christians, suddenly disappeared from the earth and were taken to heaven where they became immortal. In 2014, actor Nicolas Cage played a transatlantic pilot who has dozens of his passengers vanished in the film Left Behind, which pictured the rapture taking place in the U.S. The film was financed by Stony Lake Entertainment, a company which is focused on producing big-budget, faith-themed films for a wider audience. After the rapture, evangelicals believe there would be a follow period called the Great Tribulation, which Dr. Reagan said would last 7 years. Evangelical Christians in America generally agree that most likely there will be a war against Israel, which the scriptures call the War of Annihilation, in which all the Muslim nations which have a common border with Israel will attack Israel and Israel will defeat them. Then the Arab world will go into panic and cry out for Russia to come to their aid. And the Russians will come down with a specified group of Muslim nations, countries like Persia, Iran, Turkey, and they will be destroyed on the mountains of Israel. And the Antichrist, it said, will come from the EU. Then at that point, we believe a person called the Antichrist will rise to the power in the European Union. He will try to settle the situation in the Middle East. He will go and make a treaty with Israel to guarantee peace in the Middle East. And we believe that the moment he signs that agreement with Israel, that is when the tribulation will begin, he told Sputnik. He, the Antichrist, will have risen to power peacefully through his charisma and superintelligence in Europe. Then he will seek to make a worldwide empire. He will launch a war for the purposes of the conquering world. Of conquering the world, my bad. And that war morphs into a nuclear war. And by the middle of the tribulation, he has control of all nations of the earth. In 2008, a number of Christian internet forums concluded Tony Blair was the Antichrist. While there were also has been a discussion among evangelicals that the Antichrist is Prince Charles, Vladimir Putin, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Dr. Reagan is convinced that the Antichrist will be of Roman origin. So he says Satan hates Jews with a passion. He, the Antichrist, marches into Jerusalem and goes into the rebuilt temple, which have been rebuilt during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, and declares himself to be God. The Jews will immediately reject him, and he will begin to persecute them and try to annihilate them from the face of the earth. We believe Satan hates the Jews with a passion because it is through them that God gave the Bible, and it's through them that God gave the Messiah, and Satan hates them and will try to destroy them once again like he did in the Holocaust. Boy. He said there would be a great revolt in Asia, and armies would then march out of the Far East, possibly the Chinese armies, to fight the Antichrist. Dr. Reagan even believed it was significant for the prophecies that China was in the process of constructing a new highway across Asia to the Middle East. Now, Jesus is going to come in here. This is what's going to happen. Jesus is going to come in, and he's going to destroy the Antichrist's armies with supernatural word. When they are gathered in the valley of Armageddon, at that point, Jesus will turn to the Mount Olives in Jerusalem. He will speak to a supernatural word and will destroy all the armies of the Antichrist. He will begin to reign over all the earth. He will reign for 1,000 years, what we call the millennial reign, Dr. Reagan told Sputnik. Dr. Reagan also said that those who refused to accept God and Jesus would be consigned to death. Those who accepted him would live for 1,000 years. All I want to know is, will I get free cable? Is that going to happen? It's a holy city for Muslims too. The Bible was written several centuries before the Prophet Muhammad, the creation of Islam and the Jewish diaspora, which caused the demographic change makeup of Palestine. In 1967, Israel conquered and annexed the eastern half of Jerusalem, including the Old City, during the Six-Day War, which Jordan has refused to leave despite United Nations resolutions. Israel has always regarded Jerusalem as its capital, but the Palestinians want East Jerusalem, which traditionally had a large Arab and Muslim population, to be the capital of the Palestinian state. You see where there's a problem here? A bit of a problem. Trump's decision violates international resolutions and undermines efforts to achieve peace in the region, and it also represents a U.S. statement of abandoning sponsorship of the peace process. Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas said on Wednesday. Jordan acts as custodian of the Islamic sites in Jerusalem, known as Al-Quds in Arabic. And Jordan's king, Abdullah, and Trump's move had dangerous repercussions on the stability and security of the region. The views expressed by Dr. Reagan do not necessarily reflect the official position of Sputnik. Okay, so one of the things that has been driving evangelical Christians for an incredibly long period of time is the Scofield Bible. It's the Scofield Bible. And I wrote a big piece on the Scofield Bible. This is back on October 22nd, 2014. And let me see if I can just grab this up here so I can bring this to your attention. I did a pretty extensive breakdown of this. So it's 2014. That's going to go, hold on a bit beyond that. Give me one sec here. Yeah, it's the same piece. Okay. Let me get into it. So I wrote this back on October 22nd, 2014. And in it, I really got into the Scofield. This is one of these big, long, epic pieces that I took a fair amount of time to write. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Scofield Bible. This is when we were going through all the blood moons. And I was doing a lot of commentary on the blood moons at the time. So let me see if I can just line this up. So I was looking at that time as Ebola as part of the blood moon tribulation. Okay, because there was a lot of speculation that the Ebola plague was part of this tribulation that's being handed out by the blood moon. You know, the blood moon was a series of moons that were full lunar eclipses. They weren't broken up by the penumbral or partial eclipses, and that's what constituted a blood moon. And all these blood moons were going to lead us into that rapture and apocalyptic period. All of them were going to culminate on the Jubilee, and it didn't really happen. And a guy like John Hagee, who made a ton of money, I think, probably because there's a lot of born-again Christians out there who have a pretty big investment in this whole mythology, went out and bought his book. It was a New York Times bestseller. So nothing went down, basically. I mean, maybe the events continue to move us towards where we are. But dramatically speaking, if you're looking at those specific events, those specific blood moons, it did not lead immediately to the apocalypse. Okay? All right. So this is what I wanted to just kind of break down. I want to read this because I wrote this in October of 2014. I'm going to start here. It's all lining up now. Wars, plagues, droughts. The only thing that's missing for now is pestilence and hunger. The backdrop of Ebola, blood disease, the blood moon took on an even more symbolic meaning. The blood moon and the eclipse fell on the Feast of the Tabernacles, aka Sukkot, that's the Jubilee. This particular feast is an important one for the Jewish people. This feast is a reminder of their deliverance from Egypt. It was also during this feast that Solomon's Temple, one of the most important structures in Freemasonic mythos, was consecrated. When the temple was destroyed, it was rebuilt and finished during the feast. In some circles, it is said that this was also the time of the true birthday of Jesus, though I think that was 9/11 more likely, or that 9/11 is more likely. Don't think that this auspicious moon isn't going unnoticed by people who keep an eye on these things. As we review blood moons of the past, we can see some interesting events emerge. On the blood moon of December 3rd, 2013, Ebola broke out in West Africa. In 2014, on February, Russia moved into Ukraine, and most recently on June 3rd, Israel started its crushing offensive on the Palestinian people. These events have specific significance for the likes of the dispensationalist Christian prophets of our time. John Hagee, Pat Robertson, Benny Hinn, Kenneth Copeland et al. Preached from pages of the Scofield Reference Bible. Okay, so now I'm going to break down the Scofield Reference Bible and who Cyrus Scofield was. Okay? Cyrus Scofield was born in 1843, died in 1921, was a lawyer, and he had a pretty serious drinking problem. He abandoned his family, forcing his wife to divorce him. Scofield eventually went through a religious conversion of the charismatic variety, thanks to a fellow barrister. He remarried and was born again. His version of the Bible focuses mainly on Genesis and Revelation, with heavy emphasis on Revelation. Scofield's Bible is the most influential since the King James Version. By the start of World War II, his Bible had sold over 2 million copies. One of the commentaries in the Scofield Revised Bible, SRB, is the notion that Israel needs to be intact as one country divined by God and given to his chosen people, so that the second coming could be initiated and the children of Israel be given one last opportunity to repent before the gaze of an avenging Christ. Now, you can see where the Dr. Reagan, Daniel Reagan, had a different version of these events. Different version. I mean, his version is that Israel would continue to be persecuted. And in the Scofield Reference Bible, it's a bit different. It's a bit different. Of course, all the good Christians would be shuttled out of harm's way via the rapture. Down below on earth, Revelation would unfold, and the scourges of the final judgment would be unleashed upon mankind. And right on cue, it is reported that Thomas Eric Duncan died from Ebola, his blood disease, the blood moon. That's what happened. One of the key benefactors, a key promoter, one of Scofield's benefactors, a key promoter, in his cliff-noted version of the Bible was one George Bannerman Dealey. Yes, that's the same Dealey that Dealey Plaza was named after. Okay, he was a 33rd degree Mason, and he lived in Dallas, and he was one of Scofield's benefactors. And of course, Dallas is just below the 33rd degree parallel. Another one of Scofield's handlers and benefactors was a guy by the name of Lyman Stewart. He was the president of Union Oil and founder of Biola University. There were 4 others, including John J. Ingalls. They called themselves, these guys called themselves the Secret Six. And they were all high-ranking Freemasons. So these are the guys that are backing Scofield. They're all high-ranking Freemasons. And then you have Dealey, who, if I'm not mistaken, was also a publisher. I think George Bannerman Dealey was a publisher. Okay. Scofield eventually wound up as the minister of the First Congregational Church of Dallas, there's that city again, where he'd fallen under the spell of the writings of one John Nelson Darby, who was the founder of the Any Moment Now School of Rapture Doctrine. Darby's ideas would play a large role in Scofield's annotated Bible. Schofield's first version of the Bible was printed, if his Bible was printed in 1909 when Chiron was in Aquarius. The revised copy was printed in 1917 when Chiron was in Pisces. Where are we now? We're at the final stages of Chiron and Pisces. It's this version of the Bible which is widely in use today. Perhaps this is not so off topic, but a few weeks back, just before Ebola mania was about to hit, I was watching Oliver Stone's On Any Given Sunday, his football movie where he luxuriates in his love of Roman spectacle and large, sweaty men with anger issues. His pregame speech to the team just before their big finale against the Dallas Knights is a classic. It's a compendium of all late Pacino, Devil's Advocate, Son of a Woman, Glengarry, Glen Ross, a guy at the edge of existence laughing in the face of the devil, cursing at God. It's a great speech, actually. Pure Oliver Stone. Overriding, but Pacino is the guy that delivers it. The walls of the locker room are splashed with odd illuminated symbols, like an all-seeing eye atop a pyramid with a flaming sword. The symbol also appears at midfield at one point. The cameras flash the symbol onto a wall behind Pacino, and it cuts to LL Cool J's character who's wearing the number 33, the number of the Sovereign Grand General Inspector. Then the camera cuts to Jamie Foxx's character wearing the number 13, the number of death. Stone symbols on the locker room wall and night uniforms gave the film this surreal Templar effect, with of course Dallas as the backdrop of it all, where JFK was murdered. Stone, the JFKophile, was reminding us on a subliminal level of Dallas resting just below the 33rd degree, where on Dealey Plaza, named after 33rd degree Freemason, history, life, and time change forever. Movies are interesting, especially their timing and placement. They are classically a Piscean art form. The theater is the ritual space that takes place apart from the world where symbols, archetypes, and even interdimensional life forms, all fueled by human emotions cast upon an external screen of our minds. The theater space is the 12th house location. Film itself is a gelatinous amalgamation of petroleum, an element of Pisces viscous fluidity, stopped down and frozen in time. The timing of certain films or television shows cannot be overlooked, especially in times of planetary crisis. For instance, Brad Pitt's latest movie, Fury, takes us back to World War II. It happened to be released when both Uranus and Aries, War, and Neptune and Pisces film were retrograde. Going back into time would be an appropriate set of aspects for a World War II film. Pitt is always good for a cipher read on the times we're in. So is his partner in crime, Angie Jolie. Pitt plays War Daddy, a commander of a tank battalion caught behind enemy lines. So I went into the whole thing here about movies and what was going on at that time. Really interesting. So the Scofield Bible was completely ginned up. And John Kenneth Darby is the father of the rapture. And he was the proponent of the Any Moment Now movement. The Any Moment Now is any moment now that the rapture. This has been going on for a long time. A very, very long time. So you put together John Nelson Darby, not Kenneth Darby, John Nelson Darby, and you put together Scofield. And you basically get the Scofield Annotated Bible. That's how it all goes down. Cyrus Scofield, 1843-1921. So you can see a bigger picture here. Hopefully you can see a bigger picture. Because if this annotated version of the Bible, because what they do is they were extracting pieces of the Bible and basically creating Reader's Digest Cliff Notes and guiding people along to a certain conclusion that this was going to happen. Okay? Essentially what Scofield was doing was rewriting the Bible. He was being paid, financed by Freemasons to rewrite the Bible. That's what happened. So when people who are reading the Scofield Bible, they don't understand they're reading a Freemasonic version of the Bible. They don't get it. They don't understand it at all. But this is what happened. Now Scofield wasn't he wasn't the guy that ultimately did it. There was another guy that he hooked up with. I think it was in Boston, and put the finishing touches on the Scofield Bible. So what we're seeing here is not just an amalgamation of world events, but it's an amalgamation of world events that have been set in place earlier in the 20th century by a group of men who had a particular vision of the world. And who knows where that comes from? I mean, does that come from Albert Pike in his vision of the three world wars and the clash of the Muslims versus Christianity? I mean, is that all part of what they're programming into this version of the Bible? I just think if people who were that entrenched or that indoctrinated into the Scofield Bible understood where it came from, then they would have a much better. And who knows with these people? They may not care, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. They may not care at all. Because they'll just say, well, it's all an act of God. The Lord works in mysterious ways. That he was actually able to get these satanic Freemasons, the high-level satanic Freemasons, not the porch Masons, but the high-level satanic Masons to act and do God's work. Isn't that amazing? God is great. I mean, you think New Age people have the market on reframing. Reframing knows it is not genre specific. Let's put it that way. So just keep in mind when you hear or when you deal with the dispensationalist crowd that this is the Bible that they're referring to, and these are the roots of that Bible. Okay, you got to be clear about it. You got to bring it out to the open. Okay. All right. Now, one of the things that may or may not be related to this prophecy, maybe it is starting to rear its ugly head. So we're going to go down the rabbit hole, the security and the surveillance rabbit hole. This is happening right now. There's been a big push for Real ID. Some of you may know what Real ID is. Real ID is the implementation of a nationwide database wherein every state is essentially conforming to specific metrics that are being given to each state from the Department of Homeland Security, TSN, I'm not sure about FEMA. But these are top-down bullet points that every state has to follow and be in compliance. Real ID. So in essence, instead of having a centralized ID card that the feds will give to you, every single state will be in compliance with a federal version of an ID card. So it doesn't matter. You could have an ID from Idaho, or you can have an ID from Texas, or you can have an ID from Mississippi, and it's all going to be a federally mandated ID card. Now, what does the Real ID implementation have that's a part of it? Okay, so here we go. This is from Arizona, and this is from Zero Hedge. It says Arizona citizens are now in a government database that uses facial recognition technology to track them simply for getting a driver's license. Okay, so here we go. It is biometric scanning. The state says that the program is to prevent identity theft and fraud. Here's how it works according to the Arizona Capital Times. After someone at the Motor Vehicle Division takes your photo, your face is scanned by a system based on a proprietary algorithm that analyzes facial features. This system compares your face against 19 million photos in the state's driver database to look for similarities. If an image is similar enough, the system will flag it for further review. The program is an effort that is part of the nationwide initiative called the Real ID Act. It was created in Congress in 2005 as a response to the September 11th terror attacks. The system allows the state to comply with the federal act, which increase standards for identification documents. Although Real ID Act does not explicitly call for facial recognition, it does maintain that states need to take measures to reduce fraud. The Arizona Department of Transportation, ADOT, has already publicly boasted about the success with more than 100 cases. It has taken to court for fraud using the technology, which has been in place since 2015. But the use of the system to prevent identity theft isn't what have people worried. The problem is the lack of oversight in government programs that allows anyone with access to look at the database. As such, state-run official recognition databases are dangerous and can lead down the slippery slope to allow other operations the technology wasn't intended for. The other key issue is the fact that residents in Arizona aren't even being told that this is going on. Coupled with the lack of oversight and disclosure, it becomes a nightmare for privacy rights advocates. They're not even told. It's just happening. If you don't know that a system is in place, you actually don't have the choice, consenting to it or not. Clara Garvey, who authored the Perpetual Lineup Study. It's true. One of the things that we have is we have the power of consent. to consent or not consent to something. That is what we have. But if we don't know that a system is in place, how can we consent to it? Jim Dempsey, executive director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology, also has some reservations about the lack of disclosure currently in effect. Informed consent through giving notice to people that their faces will be matched up against millions of others when they apply for a license is a basic tenet of privacy. Jim Dempsey, the executive director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology, said, informed consent through giving notice to people that their faces will be matched up against millions of others when they apply for a license is a basic tenet of privacy. Jim Dempsey, the executive director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology, said, even if notice is given, it's unlikely that people would opt out of getting a license because facial recognition technology is used, because people will decide driving a car and having a legal ID outweigh the risks. There you go. So people will ultimately consent because they have to, unless, of course, you go through the natural law portal, in which case you're on the road to freedom. Both the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation have voiced their concerns about state facial recognition databases and how this can be tied into the push by the federal government to use these databases in airports and border checkpoints, creating dystopian Orwellian surveillance state. You think that's a fear? It's more than likely a reality. Okay? It's more than likely a reality. Now, what we have out there is we have people that are ombudsmen. We have people that are out in the front lines fighting for our privacy, fighting for our ability to have consent. And it's a constant battle. It is a constant battle. Because we have forces that just want as much information as possible. And then they'll figure out what to do and how to use it later on. Right? It's like kill them all and let God and the devil sort them out. That sort of thing. So we have people that are on the front lines of doing that. One of the bigger fish that's involved in that process, I'm totally blanking on him now. Totally blanking on him now. Oh my God, they do all the Freedom of Information Acts. Senior moment. It'll come. Judicial Watch, thank you. Tom Fillion and Judicial Watch. They're a big fish, right? But they're invested, and these people are bulldogs. And just recently, they're going after the FBI because the FBI has clearly left a trail now where the underlings of Comey and Mueller were basically sabotaging the investigation into Hillary Clinton. That's a whole other topic, right? But Judicial Watch is kind of a high level. There's lower level people out there that are invested in your rights. Maybe instead of giving a Christmas gift, we support some of these groups and give them some money so that they can stay on the front lines and try to be a buffer between us and the potential for all this to just become panoptical, where everything is tracked. And it's not great now. It's not great now. I mean, you can go out, and we've talked about this. I would say out of every 4 or 5 stoplights, 4 out of 5 stoplights have a camera associated with it, attached to it. You're in a store, you're on a camera. You go to a gas station, you're on a camera. I mean, there's cameras everywhere, right? So we're in the soft panoptical experience. Where it's all going is the hard panoptical experience, which is a lot like London or Las Vegas. And even in Las Vegas, with all those cameras that are wired, still can't come up with a whole lot of viable content as it related to what happened in Las Vegas back in October. Am I right? I mean, the entire city's wired. The casinos are wired. Every single floor has cameras. Who knows? Maybe rooms have cameras too. We don't know. And what do we get? A lot of nothing. Big nothing burger. So this is going on in Arizona. And Arizona's always led the way with this stuff. They're also, I think, the home of the place where they have the speed cams. It's the company that does the speed cam stuff. I forget the name of the company, but so essentially what they do is they clock you, and if you're doing 70 and a 65, you get a ticket and you have to pay. And cities and counties hire these guys out. What's the name of it? Let me find it. Let me get this thing. American Traffic Solutions. That's who they are. ATSOL. American Traffic Solutions. Yeah, and they're big. They're ubiquitous, and they have some interesting people that are associated with them. The guys down at NOLA, Battle NOLA Radio, may they rest in peace. They didn't die, but the show got killed. I used to love listening to that. I loved it when I first started to chime in. And you could tell that there was some weird stuff going on with that show eventually. That they were running on a shoestring budget and trying to hold it together. And they were right in the middle of all that monument stuff. They were there before it all started to go down. Anyway, this was a big topic of conversation for them because American Traffic Solutions had basically infiltrated New Orleans. And once you get these tickets, there's no recourse. You can't fight them. You can't go to a judge and challenge the ticket. You can't do it. So what happens is that ATS has gone in and said, we're going to do a deal with the local municipality, and we'll cut them in on this. So it's really kind of a real passive source of income for local municipalities. ATS has been granted the right to give the ticket, process the ticket, take the money for the ticket, and distribute those funds to the city. It's just another version of this, right? Instead of having the traffic cop with a gun, what do they have? They have the speed cams, that's on the. It's connected to. It's not even just a stoplight. They're speed cams. I mean, they're on the side of the road. They get you going a certain speed. Not even a camera. You can't even see them. It's not even like a fake police car on the side of the road that's just parked there to make you go slower, which is a pretty good deterrent, if you ask me, if you want to do that sort of thing. So what do we have? We've got the fires in California, which are raging. We've got the spiritual, political, religious fires in the Middle East that are starting to rage. And they are being spread by the breath of the dispensationalist Christian God, the breath of their spirits. And then we have the ongoing effort to be able to have our beautiful faces, images become ubiquitous, seen everywhere. But there's great hope for this world, let me tell you. I'm a firm believer in humanity. I am a firm believer in humanity. You know why? Because I think we're at a great cusp. Completely great cusp. Now, are things going to get a little bit hairy before they get better? Yeah, they sure will. Astrologically, we're just entering into Saturn and Capricorn. And by the way, I'll be doing a webinar about that tomorrow on Astrolata. And oh, by the way, if you have not found Rock Castaldo over on Facebook, he's part of the off-planet crew to some extent. Like, he's been on Emily and Randy's show fairly often. He's an interesting young guy. He comes actually from a lineage of shamans. He's 40 years old, and he's got a program. So this is pretty inventive stuff. He has to drive to work every day. So in order to get a kind of a show in, he has this thing called Drive-By Shaman. So he's basically videotaping himself while he drives. It's pretty cool. Anyway, he's going to have me on his show tonight, and tomorrow we're going to do a two-parter. And I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to talk about Saturn and Capricorn and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is coming in 2020. And that is the big kahuna. That's the big event. 2020. Saturn and Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn conjunct. And it all starts on the 22nd. That's when Saturn goes into Capricorn. This is a big, big astrological move. It's happening on the equinox. Has not happened for thousands of years. to have Saturn and Capricorn go into Capricorn on the equinox. It's been an incredibly long period of time since this has happened. So the next 3 years with Saturn and Capricorn, actually, we're looking really at the next 9 years. Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn in Aquarius, Saturn in Pisces. These next 3 years are when Saturn clears out the final 3 signs of the zodiac. So 10 years from now, we'll be into Saturn in Aries, and it's the start of a whole new cycle. The next 9 years, and specifically the next 7 years, between these 2 Saturn cycles of Saturn in Capricorn and Saturn in Aquarius are going to change the planet forever. Forever. You're going to be living in the midst of history. We're going to be living in the midst of history. I want to stick around for a while. And we're going to start to get a glimpse of that. We're already getting it, but we're going to start to get a glimpse of it pretty soon. With not just Saturn going into Capricorn, but I've talked about this before. We have Mars going into Capricorn and Aquarius for 6 months out of the year. So it starts in April and ends in October. Mars starts off in Capricorn, goes into Aquarius, retrogrades back into Capricorn and back into Aquarius again. That's 6 months of Mars between 2 pretty intense signs, to be honest with you. People think Aquarius is all love and peace and the dawn of the new age and everybody getting along and singing Kumbaya and it's a small world after all. Aquarius is not that. Aquarius is revolutionary, okay? It's revolutionary. Aquarius is associated with the star in the major arcana, but I often find that that Aquarius is also associated with the Aeon card. Well, why is that? Because it's associated with the second month of the year. And the Aeon card is the 20th card in the deck. And you take away that 0 because it doesn't exist. And what do you get? You get the number 2. Am I right? I'm right. And if you take 28 days, you get 2 plus 8, that's 1, right? And then you have the 2, you get 3, and you get this holy number 3, the sacred number 3. Anyway, so Aquarius is not always the feel-good sign. Aquarius is about radical change and revolution. We are in an Aquarian time. Why? Because Uranus has been in Aries since 2011. Aries represents the individual. The individual has been going through a personal revolution. The individual has been going through a personal wake-up call. And I've been talking about this for a long time. Do you think somebody on the left doesn't think they're woke? Of course they do. They've got just as many facts and figures as the people on the right do. And some of them are actually probably true. Some of them are true. Do you think that that we theoretically, right, have the franchise on waking up? No, everybody's in the waking up process. Do we all agree on what that looks like and how it is? No, we don't. No, we don't. Are there forces that would like to capitalize and move us in a direction that would suit their purposes? Absolutely. Because the whole idea at some point is to bring everybody into one rubric, right? One ruling system, one ruling order. In order to do that, the duality has to be dialed up to 10. It's got to be so intense that people are craving for some level of unification. And since we took God out of the equation, and I'm not talking about the Rambo version of God, I'm talking about a real deep inner connection, a flame that burns in each and every one of us, regardless of race, color, or creed, right? Some people might disagree with me with that, but that's my feeling about it, that we've taken that out of the equation. We can't even talk about it. We can't even talk about it. Christians are being demonized, unless, of course, you're a Zionist Christian, in which case you can, it's your day. Blow your horn. So that could be one of the things that would unite us, but that's been kind of eradicated now. It's not cool. It's not hip. It's weak. It's hateful. put in whatever kind of adjective you want to describe it. And so what happens now, you've got basically a group of people that are disconnected through lack of faith. And then what you'll want is you'll want them to have some desire, some need to have that duality become unified. This is what it's all about. And we're going to continue to amplify these levels of duality until people are going to just beg for a change. But here's where we come in. We come in with this, not just an idea, but we come in understanding this. Okay? We know this. We know this to be true. And one of the things that we have to do inside of ourselves, and man, this is my yoga, it's more my yoga every single day, is to unify, right? Is to become unified in who we are. Now, we can be clear in our minds about what the truth looks like, and it might just be that, okay? But unless we temper it with some heart, and unless we temper it with some compassion, and unless we temper it with some empathy, then what happens to that truth is it becomes a sharp and cold blade that uses to separate. And you can separate. It's okay to separate. Separation to some degree is an aspect of discernment. When we discern something, what are we doing? We're discerning whether or not this thing is good for us. We're discerning whether or not this thing has our best interest at heart. We're discerning whether or not this food is going to be something that's going to feed our body, mind, and spirit rather than just indulge us in just a moment of instant gratification with perhaps some unpleasant results afterwards. When we discern, we momentarily separate. That's what happens. But we don't fully separate to the point where we are completely devoid and outside of the event and the experience. The level of discernment acts as a bridge between who we are, and what we want to choose or what we consent to take into our lives. Okay? That's what discernment does. And it's an important aspect. And we can't have it both we can't have this intense truth or this intense crusade. And trust me, man, there are people on crusades right now. It's a big deal. When we get into this whole Temple Mount and the Third Temple, and we're evoking the language of the Crusades and the battle between the Cathars and the Saracens. So everybody's kind of on a crusade in some ways. But you can't have a crusade without the heart. And if we lose touch with that, and this is what we're all working on to some degree, yours truly. When we all lose touch with that, then what happens with us or to us is we become just as bad as the sociopaths and the psychopaths that are trying to cleave us, separate us, divide and conquer us. And you can lovingly say, I choose not to participate in that. And you can come from that place with, and this is the tough part, I think there's a time for anger. I think righteous indignation and anger, man, there's a place for it. But if it's too much and it's too intense, and what do we have? We have people that are acting out of anger all the time, which is not the opposite of love, by the way. We all know that. That's like basic spirituality 101. So we have to come into balance with these forces in our lives. But it's inside of ourselves. And that's a lesson I'm learning every single day. Every day. I'll share a story with you. Personal anecdote. So, I go to this restaurant down the road. And my new libation of choice is a little glass of tequila, some rock and some lime. I get rid of the sugars. And I'll go down there and have two mostly, right? Because that's you get to two, you're still in ketosis. So I do my best to keep it at two. So I was there, I don't know, about a month and a half ago. And there's this woman, this older woman. And she totally got on my case, man. Like totally left fielded me. And was telling me that I was a narcissist and a horrible person. You know, it got really intense. I'm going to spare you some of the language. I was shocked. I was shocked due to the fact that she paid that much attention to me, and shocked due to the fact that she felt emboldened enough to share her perspective on me. And we got into a nasty fight. It was just weird. So I went down there and I see her a couple times, and I could tell she was totally uncomfortable with me, or at least me being in the same vicinity as her. So I was there last night, and lo and behold, on my right corner of my right eye, who do I see at the bar? There she is. And I thought to myself, you know, I gotta start building some bridges here. I gotta start building some bridges. So I said to the bartender, I said, "You see her? I want to buy her a glass of wine. But don't tell her I did it. Okay, just don't tell her." Okay. So he put on my bill, paid for it, but I got up and left. And that was my act to move beyond this polarization. And it's one step at a time. It's just one step at a time, right? Because there are battles that we can fight, and there are battles that are worth fighting for. And there are others that are just really not worth spending all that time and energy and effort. And so for us to move beyond duality and polarity, we've got to stitch it up inside of ourselves. We do the weave, right? It's the discernment weave. It could be a new dance, like the safety dance, the discernment weave. Hey. That's, it's where we are. It's where we are. Because what is the option? The option is to be continually split like an atom. And perhaps this is where the world is going. Ultimately, that through consciousness we'll be separated. And that's a model that a lot of people talk about. And to some degree, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. If that's the way that the universe will correct itself or amend itself, and that's the way it is. But on the other hand, if we see this duality, if we see this polarity, if we see it happen on a daily basis, then it's up to us in some ways to begin that mending process inside of ourselves. And that is I think that's the litmus test, to be honest with you. And are we always going to pull it off and be graceful about it? No. And some of us will have greater tests than others when it comes to something like this. But ultimately, if we want unification of spirit, body, mind, consciousness, that's where it all is. So we have to solve the divide and conquer inside of ourselves. Ultimately, this is where it's all going. At that point, wow, then things get real interesting. In my estimation, they get interesting. Maybe they're already interesting. A bit too interesting. We've been jamming here for about an hour and 15 minutes. And I don't know, I'm not sure how much more I have to say. So I think that's really where I wanted to get everything. To get to that point where we're talking about, because the world is moving towards greater and greater fractionalization. It's moving to greater sense of being compartmentalized, and less unity than there's ever been before. Very trying times in a lot of ways. So as we move into this season where theoretically we're supposed to be with our parents, and this is going to be a tough time for families still. I mean, we're just a year out of the Trump election. How are certain families going to deal with this? Because again, that whole election was a family quake. People got divorced over that election. It's terrible. It's, and that's what apparently that's part of the deconstruction phase, which we're in, and that's all part of it. But the reconstruction phase starts with you. Okay? We know the deconstruction is happening. The reconstruction starts with you. All right, I'll be on Astrology tomorrow. We're going to be talking about Saturn and Capricorn on the webinar. It's, I think, a 3-hour webinar. And so I'll have a lot of stuff about Saturn and Capricorn, Saturn in general, the nature of Saturn. It's going to be pretty intense. And if you have not signed up for it, I guess there's 30% off You can go to astrology.com and jump in on it. And you can see the time and everything that's set up for it. And I'll be on Rock Castaldo's show both tonight and tomorrow night. We'll probably do some two-parter stuff. And you can check me out there. And I'm working on a piece for the website, which I will finish. I promise. It's on the Corey Feldman stuff. I got to get that done. New revelations about Corey Feldman the other day as well. All right, why don't we get on out of here? Get into your Friday. So I'll have to look at the video and see how the video turned out. Hopefully it turned out well. All right, you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real. Your heart to stay open to what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix, and if I'm not seeing you tomorrow over at Astrology, I'll see you on Sunday night on the Sunday night live stream. We're going to get into breaking down Bitcoin. We're going to look at the astrology of Bitcoin on Sunday night. So you're going to want to watch that and check that out. Okay, have a wonderful Sunday. Have a wonderful weekend. And for all you friends and family in Southern California, God bless you all. I hope you get out safe. Words can't express what a lot of people are having to go through and what they're having to leave behind. Pretty scary situation, and my heart goes out to all of you. So take good care out there, and hopefully I'll see you guys tomorrow at Astrology and over on